What I'm about to tell you will sound like science fiction, but it's happening right now, in over 100 countries simultaneously, and most people have no idea that the freedom they've taken for granted their entire lives is about to disappear, not through some dramatic revolution or military coup, but through a quiet technological shift that governments are selling as progress, as convenience, as the future of money itself. The shift is called Central Bank Digital Currency, or CBDC, and if you haven't heard much about it, that's intentional because the less you understand about what's coming, the less you'll resist it. And resistance is exactly what those in power want to avoid, because what they're building isn't just a new form of money. It's a control system so complete, so invasive, so inescapable that it would make every authoritarian regime in history envious. And the terrifying part is that most people will welcome it. They'll line up for it. They'll demand it, because it will be packaged as solving problems that the current system created. Problems like inflation, like financial instability, like the inconvenience of cash, and people will trade their freedom for convenience without realizing what they've given up until it's too late to get it back. Let me explain how we got here, because this didn't start yesterday. This has been planned for decades, building slowly, establishing the infrastructure, creating the legal frameworks, conditioning the public to accept a world where every transaction is monitored, every purchase is tracked, every financial decision you make is visible to those in power. And to understand where we're going, you need to understand what money actually is, because most people have never really thought about it. They accept money as a given, as something that just exists, but money is a technology, and like all technologies, it can be designed to serve different purposes, and the purpose is about to change in a way that will reshape human society forever. For most of human history, money was physical. It was something you could hold, something tangible, whether it was shells or salt or precious metals, and this physicality gave money certain properties that we've come to take for granted, properties like privacy, like autonomy, like the ability to conduct a transaction without anyone else knowing about it. And these properties weren't accidents, they were features, because physical money created a barrier between you and those who might want to control what you do with your resources. And throughout history, whenever governments wanted to increase their control over populations, one of the first things they did was try to gain control over the money supply, to monitor transactions, to restrict what people could buy and sell and trade, because money isn't just an economic tool, it's a freedom tool, and whoever controls your money controls you. The transition away from physical money began slowly, first with checks, then with credit cards, then with electronic banking, and each step was sold to the public as progress, as making life easier, as eliminating the hassles of carrying cash. And in many ways, it did make things easier, but it also did something else. It created a digital record of every transaction, a trail that could be followed, a history that could be analyzed, and this data became incredibly valuable, not just to banks and corporations, but to governments, because data is power. And financial data is the most revealing kind, because it shows what you buy, where you go, who you associate with, what you value, what you fear, what you desire. And once you have that information, you have leverage, you have control. But there was still a problem from the perspective of those who wanted total financial surveillance, and that problem was cash, because cash transactions leave no digital trail. They're anonymous, they're untraceable, they exist outside the surveillance grid, and as long as cash exists, people have an escape valve, a way to conduct private transactions, a way to opt out of the system, and this bothered governments and central banks. It bothered them a lot because they couldn't fully control what they couldn't fully see. So for years now, there's been a coordinated effort to eliminate cash, to make it inconvenient, to make it suspicious, to associate it with crime and tax evasion and terrorism, because the easiest way to get people to give up a freedom is to convince them that only bad people need that freedom, that if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, which is one of the most dangerous phrases ever constructed, because everyone has something to hide, not because they're criminals, but because privacy is a fundamental human need, a prerequisite for dignity, for autonomy, for freedom itself. The campaign against cash has been remarkably successful. In Sweden, cash transactions now account for less than 10% of all payments, and the government is actively pushing to eliminate cash entirely within a few years. In India, the government shocked the nation in 2016 by invalidating 86% of the currency in circulation overnight, forcing hundreds of millions of people into the digital banking system. In China, cash has become so rare that street vendors, taxi drivers, even beggars use digital payment systems, and the public accepted these changes because they were framed as progress, as modernization, as the inevitable march of technology. But what's really happening is the elimination of the last barrier to total financial surveillance. And once cash is gone, once every transaction exists only in digital form, the door opens for something far more powerful and far more dangerous, and that something is central bank digital currency. Now let me be very clear about what a CBDC is and isn't, because the distinction matters, and most people don't understand it. The money in your bank account right now is already digital. You already use digital payments every day with credit cards and payment apps, but that digital money still operates through a network of private banks, and those banks, while certainly collecting data on your transactions, still provide a layer of separation between you and the government. There's still some friction in the system, still some barriers to total surveillance, still some level of competition and choice, but a central bank digital currency eliminates all of that. Because with a CBDC, every unit of currency is issued directly by the central bank, every transaction is recorded on a government ledger, every purchase you make, every payment you receive, every transfer of value is instantly visible to the state, and there's no private bank mediating that relationship. There's no buffer, there's no privacy, there's just you and the all-seeing eye of government power, and if that doesn't terrify you, then you haven't thought through the implications. If this is making you uncomfortable, if you're starting to see where this is heading, then you need to stay with me, because the next part reveals why this matters so much, why this is the culmination of everything we've been talking about in this series, and if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because what comes next will show you exactly how digital currency becomes the ultimate tool of control, and once you see it, you won't be able to look at money the same way ever again. Think about what becomes possible when the government has direct real-time access to every financial transaction in the economy, and not just access, but control, because a CBDC isn't just monitored by the central bank, it's programmable by the central bank, which means they can set rules about how it's spent, where it's spent, when it's spent, and who can spend it. And this isn't theoretical, this is explicitly part of the design proposals for CBDCs around the world. They talk about it openly in central bank papers and international financial conferences. They call it smart money, programmable money, money that can be designed to achieve policy goals. But what does that actually mean in practice? It means that your money could come with an expiration date, forcing you to spend it by a certain time or lose it, which central banks like because it prevents saving and forces consumption, which they believe stimulates the economy, but which also eliminates your ability to build wealth, to plan for the future, to have a financial cushion against uncertainty. It means your money could be restricted geographically, so you can only spend it in your local area or your home country, which governments like because it prevents capital flight and keeps wealth trapped within their borders. It means your money could be restricted by category, so you can buy food but not alcohol, or medicine but not cigarettes, or approved products but not unapproved ones. And who decides what's approved? The government decides. The same government that can change its mind about what's acceptable, based on politics, based on ideology, based on whatever serves the interests of those in power at any given moment. But it gets worse, much worse, because programmable money means that the government can take your money without ever physically seizing anything. They can simply deactivate it, make it disappear from your digital wallet with the press of a button. No court order required, no due process, no appeal, just gone. And they can do this for any reason, because you said something they don't like on social media, because you attended a protest they consider unauthorized, because you donated to a political cause they oppose, because you associated with people they deem problematic, or simply because you fell behind on your taxes or parking tickets or any other obligation to the state, and the money that you earned, that you worked for, that you thought was yours, vanishes. Instantly, because it was never really yours to begin with. It was always theirs. They just let you use it as long as you behaved. This isn't paranoid speculation. This is already happening in the testing grounds for these systems. In China, the digital yuan has been rolled out in multiple cities. and it comes with built-in surveillance and control features. The government can see every transaction, track every user, and freeze accounts at will. And they've used this power, they've frozen the accounts of dissidents, of protesters, of anyone who challenges state authority. And the same technology is being tested in Nigeria, in the Bahamas, in Jamaica, in Sweden, and it's being developed by every major central bank in the world, including the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, and they're all moving in the same direction toward the same system because they're all coordinating through the Bank for International Settlements, which we talked about in the previous episode. The central bank for central banks that operates above national governments and coordinates global monetary policy. Now think about what this means for your life, for your freedom, for your ability to resist unjust authority, because throughout history, economic independence has been the foundation of all other freedoms. If you can feed yourself, house yourself, sustain yourself without relying on the state, then you have leverage, you have autonomy, you can say no, you can resist, you can organize, you can fight back. But if the state controls your access to money, if they can turn off your economic existence with a keystroke, then what freedom do you really have? You become dependent, compliant, obedient, because the alternative is starvation, is homelessness, is complete social and economic exile. And this is the point. This has always been the point, because the ultimate goal of centralized power is the elimination of alternatives, the creation of a system where exit is impossible, where resistance is futile, where compliance is the only option. But surely you might be thinking, surely there are laws against this, surely there are constitutional protections, surely democratic institutions would never allow such a system to be implemented, and I wish I could tell you that you're right. But history suggests otherwise, because laws can be changed, constitutions can be reinterpreted, and democratic institutions can be captured, especially when the change happens slowly, incrementally, always for good reasons, always to solve urgent problems, always framed as temporary emergency measures that somehow become permanent. And by the time people realize what's happened, the infrastructure is already in place, the legal frameworks are already established, the public has already been conditioned to accept it, and the window for resistance has closed. Look at what happened during the COVID pandemic. Governments around the world implemented financial controls that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. They froze bank accounts, they restricted cash withdrawals, they monitored transactions for compliance with lockdown rules, and in Canada, when truckers protested vaccine mandates, the government didn't send in troops, they didn't arrest everyone, they simply froze their bank accounts and the accounts of anyone who donated to support them, and suddenly people who had done nothing violent, nothing illegal under traditional definitions, found themselves unable to buy food, unable to pay rent, unable to access their own money, and this was done without trial, without due process, simply by decree, and most people didn't object. In fact, many people cheered because the protesters were on the wrong side politically, and when you normalize financial punishment for political dissent, when you accept that the government can cut off your economic lifeline for holding unapproved views, you've accepted the premise of the control system. You've conceded that money is a privilege granted by the state rather than a property right you possess. And once that principle is established, everything else follows. Now I want you to consider the bigger picture, the way this connects to everything else we've discussed in this series. Because the CBDC isn't happening in isolation, it's part of a larger transformation of the global system, a response to the debt crisis, the currency crisis, the legitimacy crisis that's been building for decades. And those in power know that the current system is unsustainable. They know that the debt can never be repaid. They know that faith in fiat currencies is eroding. They know that inequality is reaching levels that threaten social stability. And their solution isn't to fix the underlying problems. It's to tighten control, to eliminate the escape routes, to make sure that when the system does collapse, and it will collapse, they're in a position to manage the collapse on their terms, to determine who suffers and who doesn't, to maintain their power through the crisis rather than losing it to popular upheaval. The CBDC is the mechanism for that control, because in a world where physical cash no longer exists, where all money is digital and programmable, the government can implement negative interest rates without people being able to escape by withdrawing cash. They can force spending by making your money decay if you don't use it. They can direct economic activity by making certain purchases easier and others harder. They can redistribute wealth by simply reprogramming the code, and they can do all of this without needing your consent, without needing to pass legislation, without needing to win elections, because the control is built into the infrastructure itself, into the very architecture of the monetary system. And once that architecture is in place, it doesn't matter who holds formal political power, because the real power resides in whoever controls the code. Whoever can program the money, whoever can decide who gets access and who doesn't. Do you understand now why this matters? Do you see why this is the end game, the culmination of centuries of centralization, the final lock on the cage? Because once you eliminate cash, once you make all money programmable and controlled by central authorities, there's no going back, there's no reform, there's no peaceful transition to something better, because you've eliminated the tools that people need to organize resistance, to build alternatives, to opt out of systems that don't serve them. And you've done it in the name of efficiency, in the name of security, in the name of fighting crime and terrorism and tax evasion. But the real crime is the theft of human autonomy. The real terrorism is the state's monopoly on violence backed by total economic control. And the real evasion is the elite's escape from accountability while they trap everyone else in a system designed to extract and monitor and punish. So what do you do? What can anyone do when the machinery of control is so vast, so coordinated, so technically sophisticated that individual resistance seems pointless? The first thing you do is understand that the system depends on your compliance, on your participation, on your acceptance of the premise that there's no alternative. And that premise is false. There are always alternatives. They're just harder. They require sacrifice. They require thinking differently about what money is and what it's for. And this is why Bitcoin was invented. Not by governments or central banks, but by someone or some group that understood exactly what was coming and built a system that operates outside central control, that can't be programmed, that can't be seized without your consent, that exists as a form of digital cash with all the properties that made physical cash valuable: privacy, autonomy, resistance to censorship. And this is also why governments and central banks hate Bitcoin and why they're working so hard to regulate it, to control it, to delegitimize it, because it threatens their monopoly. It offers an exit, and exits are exactly what they're trying to eliminate. But Bitcoin is just one example. The broader point is that you need to think seriously about your relationship to the monetary system, about how dependent you are on digital infrastructure controlled by others, about what you would do if your access to that system was suddenly cut off. And this means building parallel systems, creating local networks of exchange, maintaining some holdings in physical assets that can't be digitally confiscated, understanding that the convenience of the digital world comes with hidden costs, costs that are about to become very visible very quickly, and the people who prepare now, who diversify now, who build resilience now, will be far better positioned than those who assume the system will always work the way it has, because it won't. It's changing. It's changing rapidly, and the change is intentional, and the outcome is designed to benefit those in power at the expense of everyone else. I want you to think about what kind of world you want to live in, what kind of world you want to leave for your children and grandchildren, because the choices we make now, the systems we accept or reject now, will determine whether future generations inherit freedom or slavery, whether they live as autonomous individuals or as subjects whose every action is monitored and controlled. And this isn't hyperbole, this is the actual choice. Because once the infrastructure of total financial surveillance is in place, once every transaction exists only in programmable digital form, controlled by central authorities, the capacity for tyranny becomes absolute, limited only by the restraint of those in power. And if history has taught us anything, it's that power without limits is power without restraint, and restraint is never guaranteed. It's always contested, always fought for, always won through resistance rather than granted through benevolence. So I want to know what you think. I want you to leave a comment telling me whether you believe digital currencies are inevitable, whether you think there's still time to resist, whether you plan to use CBDCs if your government requires them, or whether you'll find alternatives, because these conversations matter, these discussions matter. The more people who understand what's at stake, the harder it becomes to implement the system without opposition. And opposition, even if it doesn't stop the system entirely, can slow it down, can force compromises, can create spaces for alternatives to develop and grow, and those spaces Those alternatives, those networks of people who refuse to surrender their autonomy, that's where freedom survives. That's where hope lives. That's where the future gets decided. If this has fundamentally changed how you think about money, about freedom, about the relationship between technology and power, then you need to subscribe immediately, because the next episode is going to reveal something even more shocking. We're going to trace the direct connection between the collapse cycles we discussed earlier and the digital control systems being implemented now. We're going to show you how CBDCs are the solution that elites have been planning for decades to manage the inevitable collapse of the debt-based fiat system. And once you see that connection, once you understand that the crisis isn't accidental but engineered, you'll never trust the official narrative again. So subscribe now, turn on notifications, and prepare yourself for the final piece of the puzzle. Because everything we've discussed has been leading to this, and the truth is darker than you imagine.